Welcome back to Made Men. It's episode 7. Ray Franz and I will be continuing our talk with author and investigative reporter Guss Russo.
So, but that's it. He wasn't hired. The mob, I mean, you guys are experts on this. Did the mob ever kill a big politician, a president, a mayor, a governor? It's not something they do because it brings the heat, right? They didn't even kill cops. I mean, there's probably an exception there. I could be wrong, but they didn't. They stayed away from politicians and cops and judges. And the other thing is, the mob kind of liked JFK. Saying, yeah, I interviewed friends of Sam Giancana, and they said, "Why would we kill him? We liked it. We partied with him in Vegas. We wanted to be him. Why would we kill JFK?" And yeah, but you have to start with the shooter and see who he was connected to, and he was connected to nobody.
What about Jack Ruby? What an incredible coincidence who caused so many questions to be raised. Was it just that? Just a horrible coincidence who he was?
It was a horrible coincidence. Two crazy guys intersected in Dallas in that weekend, Oswald and Ruby, and threw the world upside down. Ruby, I know his motive inside and out, much more than even Oswald, because I interviewed so many people. I interviewed his brother. Who gave me his diary, copies of his diary. Interviewed, everybody who knew Ruby, the people who worked for him in his nightclub. He shot Oswald to avenge the things that were being said about Jews in Dallas. You say, what are you talking about? A Jewish guy took an anti-Kennedy ad out in the Dallas Morning News, a big full-page ad calling him JFK a traitor, signed by Bernard Weissman. So in Dallas, some people were starting to whisper that maybe the Jews were behind this. And Ruby worshipped JFK. I mean, worshipped him. And this comes from everybody who knew him and all the things he did at his club. If you told a joke about President Kennedy, you were fired at his nightclub, okay? Or he got his brass knuckles out and threw you down the stairs. He worshipped Kennedy. He worshipped Dallas. He worshipped his Jewish heritage. And all these things were being destroyed in one day by one guy. And it drove him nuts.
Matter of fact, I was more remorseful than angry as I lost.
Specifically, what are you referring to now? The president?
Yeah.
Tell us how you felt about the whole thing.
He's telling you right now if you look at
him.
Stay tuned for more and follow us on 6 Degrees Media on the Roku and all of our social media.
At Elgin Volkswagen, you spend less and get more. Take your pick from a huge selection of all the hard-to-find models. Visit us today on Randall Road and I-90, where you spend less and get more. That's Elgin Volkswagen.
When he was wrestled to the ground by the cops, Jim Lavelle, who was a great friend of mine, the guy in the white suit who was handcuffed to Ruby when he was shot. Ruby told Jim Lavelle, who he knew, because everybody knew Ruby, all the cops knew Ruby. His club was a block away from the police station, and he lived at the police station his whole life, practically. Jim goes, "Jack, what the hell?" And Ruby's first words to Jim were, "I did it to prove the Jews have guts. We avenged President Kennedy. We didn't kill him." It got so crazy with Ruby as his mind deteriorated over the years. Earl Warren came to Dallas with the Warren Commission to see the scene of the crime, and Warren said, "Well, I better go over and say hi to Ruby. He's right across the street in the Dallas County Jail, and he's been begging for me to talk to him." So he goes over to talk to Earl Warren talks to Jack Ruby, and Ruby, in his madness, has Warren look out the window of his prison cell where you could actually oversee Dealey Plaza. He was right there that's where the county jail was, and he pointed out the trains behind the grassy knoll, the train tracks, to Earl Warren. He said, "See those boxcars going by, Chief Justice? They're full of Jews. They're taking them down to Austin to kill them. The pogrom is on." And Earl Warren's going, "Get me out of here," kind of thing. And then Ruby, this is all in Earl Warren's biography. Okay. Then Ruby says, "Come here, put your ear against the wall. Can you hear? They're torturing Jews in the next room." This is what he was all about. Okay. That's the motivation. He was a proud Jewish guy who was also crazy, who thought that he was avenging, what was being done to the Jews. And plus he worshiped President Kennedy. He spent but he wasn't at the Dallas jail that weekend, Ruby. He was there all weekend. Was driving around Dallas looking for a guy named Bernard Weissman who put that ad in the paper. He was going to kill him. And when he couldn't find him, he concluded that there was no Bernard Weissman. It was a frame-up of Jews. Now he was even madder. Isn't that wild? Had nothing to do with Chicago, nothing to do with organized crime. He was run out of Chicago by the mobsters because he was an FBI informant.
And he just happened to be boyhood friends with Lenny Patrick's brother.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. But he was a criminal informant. He escaped organized crime by going to Dallas, which adopted him. It was his new hometown. And of course, he had connections with Campisi and Marcello, because that's where he got his booze and his strippers from. But that was the end of it. He was not. Last thing I'll say about that, because I could go on forever with the Kennedy thing. Jack Ruby was well known as the biggest loudmouth in Dallas. Now, who's going to hire the biggest loudmouth to commit the murder of the century? It's ludicrous.
Well, but there's just so many retorts to that lead to why we're so obsessed. Maybe the people who hired Willie Byoff to handle the outfit matters, and they weren't flawless, so they certainly did get people involved that cost them terribly.
Oh yeah, but you wouldn't hire a guy who loved President Kennedy and who was a criminal informant on the mob to take out Oswald, because who was going to take out Ruby?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's a good point.
And I'll give you another last good point by this. When he went downtown that day, to show you how this could not be a planned rub out, he went downtown that day not to kill Ruby. He was sitting home in his apartment with his roommate, watching what was going to be the transfer of Oswald on TV from one prison to another, from the city prison to the county prison. Everybody, we were home watching it as a kid. My parents, we were all watching. We were glued to this stuff. The whole country was watching it, and Ruby was watching it. And he gets a call from one of his strippers that she's going to get kicked out of her apartment if she doesn't get $25 today. He says, "All right, I'll go down to Western Union and send you a wiregram." And he was in his underwear at home, according to his roommate, puts his clothes on. This is the hired assassin, right? The rub out of the century. He's watching TV in his underwear. He gets his dog, which he worships, his little dog, puts her in the car. We're just going for a car ride, Sheba. And he rides with Sheba downtown, parks the car, cracks the window open for the dog, goes into Western Union at 11 o'clock in the morning. By this time, Oswald's already been transferred, or so everybody thought, but it was postponed. And Ruby couldn't have known that. The transfer was postponed. Nobody knew that was going to happen. So Ruby's waiting in line at Western Union, no rush. Meanwhile, Oswald's being transferred a block away. Ruby walks out of the Western Union, ready to go get Sheba, his dog, and drive home. And he sees the crowd down by the police station. He leaves the Western Union at 11:17, because it's stamped on his Western Union thing, the receipt. 11:17. He walks down to the jail, which takes about 2 minutes. Okay. Casually walks down the ramp where everybody knew him, because every cop knew him. He walks in, and at the time he gets there, with seconds to spare, Oswald walks out. He was casually waiting in line 5 minutes ago at Western Union. He'd have waited 10 minutes longer if the line was longer. I spoke to the guy who was the Western Union clerk. He said he was in no rush. If the guy ahead of him in line had 2 more sentences on his telegram, this never would have happened. He got there within seconds. Oswald walks out. Ruby's gun is in his pocket because it was in his pocket every day of his life. And he saw the smirk on Oswald's face, and plugged it. Another thing, he told his brother, who I interviewed, he said, the weird thing is, Leon, he said, I didn't even plan to kill him. I didn't want to kill him. I wanted to hurt him. That's why I shot him in the stomach. If I didn't want to kill him, I was close enough, I could have shot him in the head. He said, I just wanted him to feel the pain we were all feeling. His shot was a 1 in a million shot that nicked his Oswald's aortic artery. And it 9 times out of 10, you would have survived that shot. And Ruby didn't even want to kill him, according to his brother. He just wanted to hurt him. So how many things do we need before we say it's not a mob hit?
This is the time of the recordings of the Chicago mob that were going on illegally. And I know you're well aware that none of those recordings ever indicated they had any idea this was going to happen, much less orchestrated it.
There's a great part in there where Giancana's talking to Chucky English, I think, at the Armory, where they were being microphone. There was a microphone there. And English is saying to him, yeah, this guy they got for killing Kennedy, this is like the next day. He says, I heard he was a Marxist. And Giancana says, you kidding? He was a hell of a marksman. That's how out of it Giancana was.
It's funny and it's not related, but I have that desk that Sam Giancana sat at the Armory Lounge. So yeah, I managed to get that, and a little piece of history that conversation probably took place at.
Oh, wow, that's great. There's another conversation where, I don't know if it's Giancana, but one of the top guys is saying that after the Kennedy thing, the day after, he's wiretapped or bugged, and he's saying, this Kennedy thing is terrible, but they're going to blame us for it. They blame us for everything. You watch, they're going to blame us. And, they did. Some people did.
Sure. Well, absolutely. And so many things happened to put fuel on the fire. The assassinations of Giancana, Roselli, and Nicoletti, all in the days before they were supposed to testify before the church committee, things like that made people think, well, they were just afraid of them telling what they knew about the Kennedy assassination, which was really nothing, right?
They were afraid they were going to talk about the skim. My conclusion is everybody who got killed, whether it was Danny Seifert, Roselli, Giancana, Dorfman, they had one thing in common. They could have brought down Vegas, and they were talking to the feds. Roselli and Giancana made a point of saying, we're never going to prison again, which is like the kiss of death. That's like saying, we'll cooperate. They had to go. In fact, Roselli was a friend of Accardo's. It had to be tough to make some of those calls, but this was business. And I'm convinced to this day, of course, it had nothing to do with the assassination because they weren't involved, and they knew they weren't involved, so it couldn't have been that. It was even Hoffa was talking to the feds, and he was rubbed out in that same time period. Boom, 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 boom. And so Vegas existed for 8 or 10 more years, a lot of money. And so that whole, they were talking to the church committee, crazy. As far as some people, the other mob story about the Kennedy thing is that they had to kill him for revenge for the Bay of Pigs, for letting Cuba go, right? Revenge for putting Bobby Kennedy in the attorney general's position. Bobby hated the mob, of course. And so one of the theories is they shot Kennedy because he appointed Bobby Kennedy as attorney general. Well, and I know from some of Sam Giancana's closest people that had nothing to do with it, of course. What it was when Bobby was appointed attorney general in December of '60, as President-elect Kennedy appointed him, his father, Joe, had that done, told Jack to appoint Bobby. And there was a good reason for that, because Bobby would never go after his own father for fixing the 1960 election. So that was insurance right there. And Giancana was so mad about this appointment, not that he was going to kill Kennedy, he had another way to get even. Bay of Pigs was coming up in April. The mob was supposed to kill Castro during the invasion. Giancana, according to my really good sources, turned to them and said, "Stand down. It's off. Let that motherfucker fail." And that's why the Bad Pigs didn't succeed, in my opinion. Castro was supposed to be killed that night. And Giancana said, "Nah, hey, it's off." And they've been working with Eisenhower administration and with the Kennedy FBI up until that point to shoot Castro. And so that's how they got even. And but they certainly didn't kill Kennedy over that, you know. They had nothing to do with Oswald.
Do you think they killed Bobby?
I mean, for instance, what is the Keating bill? I mean, now that's the problem.
No, Sirhan did it. There's a, if you want to search for it, there's a, I'm not an RFK expert. I know some things about it. There's a video of Sirhan confessing to David Frost in an interview where a very soberly, calmly, he says, I did it. I'm sorry. He was apologetic. He said, I was young, I was stupid. It was the first time I ever got drunk in my life. He went to this party at the Ambassador Hotel and for the Kennedy thing, and he was drinking, and I got drunk, and it all at once when I saw him, and you know, the whole thing with the Palestinian jets, the jets he was going to sell to RFK wanted to sell to Israel, and of course Sirhan was Palestinian, and but the regret that you get out of that interview with David Frost, it's sincere. He really, you know, apologized for it big time to the Kennedy family, to the American people. You know, and plus, again, the forensics and ballistic evidence is overwhelming that he did it. And you can't, another guy you can't link anybody else to. You can have hypotheses, but hard evidence, there's nothing.
The woman in the dress there that day that was supposedly talking to Sirhan, have you heard about her?
Yeah, he talked about her.
So is there any correlation between those two? He was a lone gunman, just like Oswald, no CIA connection or anything like that for all the conspiracy theorists.
Right. In one of Sirhan's interviews, which I could pinpoint now, there's just too much in my skull, but you can find it. He gave a number of interviews. He talked about the girl in the polka dot dress. And okay, he goes to the Ambassador East, where the thing was, the Robert Kennedy event. And he starts drinking. There were free drinks. I think he said he had Tom Collins or Jack Daniel, whatever. He said, I'd never been drunk. So I went to the coffee. There was a coffee table. And he said, I thought maybe the coffee would sober me up. And there was a pretty girl there in a polka dot dress. And she kind of flirted with me, and I kind of flirted with her. And he says that he followed her around that night into the ballroom and everything else. He wasn't at that point thinking about shooting Robert Kennedy. He had a gun in his pocket, like Ruby. He had a gun. It was a brand new gun that he bought, that he had just come from a shooting range that afternoon to test out his new gun. It happened to be on him. Okay, he didn't put it in his pocket to go to the ambassador and shoot Kennedy. Pretty spur of the moment kind of thing. Anyway, he follows her. Now, if I remember correctly, he said he followed her into the pantry. And then he saw Bobby Kennedy come in. So the girl, he did talk to her, and in his take, he said, just a girl I met at the coffee stand in the lobby. And I was following her around all night. And then when he saw Bobby, I guess the whole thing with the jets to Israel, and he just went, and he was drunk, and he was like, what, 21, 22 years old, and he was a kid. And, you know, yeah, that's what I know about it. And I'll tell you, our friend Dan Mulday, who I guess you guys know of or know, who's a great organized crime reporter and author, he had a contract because he had defended Sirhan for many years. He thought Sirhan was innocent, and there was a lot of LA police cover-up. He got a book deal to do the killing of Robert F. Kennedy, and he spent a lot of time working the case, interviewing, going over everything. And the book deal was based on the fact that there was going to be a conspiracy and Sirhan was innocent. By the time he got done his research and actually sat face to face with Sirhan a number of times in the prison cell, at one point he looked at Sirhan and said, "You son of a bitch, you did it, didn't you?" And Sirhan just smiled. And Dan Moldea had such journalistic heroism to say, "I was wrong." For years he had thought Sirhan was innocent, and he went and he called his publisher up, assured he was going to lose his book contract, and he said, "I was wrong. Sirhan did it." And they kept his book contract. Or no, did he have to change publishers? I'm not clear on that, but the book came out. Might have been under a different publisher. Can't remember, but he talks about it. He writes this wonderful book pursuing the evidence in the Sirhan case, and on the last page, I was wrong. He did it. So another organized crime author, who followed that story, you can talk to him about it, and he'll give you the more accurate details. But that's essentially what happened. He came to the same conclusion. He was a lone nut who got drunk and had a gun on him. And
So these guys act on whims sometimes.
yeah, the bad
They
guys
just
win
act on a
sometimes.
whim.
That's it. Really, it's really true. And they change history without even realizing how much history they're changing, because they're young and they think they're just doing something out of passion or whatever. I mean, Lee Harvey Oswald had no idea he created an industry and turned a whole generation against the American government, the CIA in particular.
Kind of really did. I mean, a lot of conspiracy theorists were born in the 80s. Like, I'm 52. A lot of guys my age grew up watching TV and were like, there's got to be more to it. There's got to be more to it. And you're like, well, that Jack Ruby organized crime connection is just a coincidence. And it's kind of hard for people to accept that, because honestly, the older we get, the more life experiences we have. Sometimes we get jaded and we feel like there's got to be more to it, but sometimes there's not.
Sometimes there's not. In the Oswald case, there's a little more in terms of what was he talking to the Cubans about before he did it. And LBJ thought it was real, that the Cuban connection was real. He shut down the connection, the investigation of Cubans in Mexico that night. He said, "Shut it down. I don't want to start World War III."
I will do my best. That is all I can do. I ask for your help and God's.
Welcome to St. Charles Do It Best Hardware. Our experienced and friendly staff are here to help. Let me show you around. We have 26,000 square feet that includes tools the pros use, our paint center with our color bar, a great selection of pet supplies, seasonal indoor and outdoor items, over 30,000 items in the store and 60,000 more online for pickup or delivery. Stop in and let us show you the St. Charles Do It Best difference.
You're afraid you'll fall in love with me.
That wouldn't be hard.
Oh, now careful, careful.
You enjoy making fun of me, don't you?
Was Cuba going to allow Oswald to flee? Were the Russians and the Cubans going to allow Oswald to flee the United States to Cuba?
Oh, that's a wild story. The Russians weren't involved at all. It was mostly the Cubans he was talking to in Mexico. And we spent a lot of time in Mexico City on other projects interviewing Cubans who ran into Oswald down there. We found people who worked in the Cuban embassy at the time he was there. And they did it for a German film I did, a big investigation of this. We spent most of our effort in Mexico. Anyway, the story we got, which I think is true, is that when Oswald offered to do this, they encouraged him, because Kennedy had been trying to murder Fidel for 3 years or 2 years. And they didn't think he was going to do it. They thought he was a nut, but they said, "Sure, go do it. You want some money?" "No, I don't want any money." They told us that he didn't want money. It was all about ideology. He wanted to show that he was a Marxist and he wanted to be a hero. And they said, "Well, if you do it, we'll take you to Havana and you will be a hero." And there's a possibility they were in Dallas that day, the Cubans, to pick him up. There was a Cuban flight that was at a nearby airport that day. And the Cuban sources we had told us that had we had picked him up after the assassination, we weren't going to fly him to Havana. We were going to dump him in the Gulf of Mexico. That would have been the end of the story.
Wow.
And yeah, that's, I think, what really played out, that they were using him like everybody else would use him. He was an idiot, and he didn't know he was being played. His offer to kill Castro was taken seriously by these guys. It was reported to Fidel long before the assassination happened. He knew something might happen, and we know that from his FBI informant contacts. He didn't know we're FBI informants in the Communist Party. He knew something was going to happen. He told his people to aim their surveillance dishes at Texas on the morning of November 22nd. They had been aimed at Florida and Washington for years. And he said, turn them to Texas today. Something might happen. I want to be the first person to know. And we got that from the CIA, admitted that. The CIA, what's his name? Not Brian Littell, author, CIA guy who wrote a wonderful book on Fidel's secrets. His informants told him that Fidel had ordered this on the morning of the assassination. Brian Littell's book on Fidel is phenomenal. And he came away a believer that the Cubans knew what was going to happen, as I had already written. And so, long answer, had they have contacted him or met him, had Tippit not shot Oswald, or not forced Oswald into the movie theater by putting his body in front of him and getting killed, had that not gone down, that was unpredicted, the Cubans might have linked up with him. And
dumped him in the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, he'd be swimming with the fishes, as they say in Chicago. So it's ludicrous, the whole mob thing with the Kennedy thing.
What would you say about, we've established the outfit doesn't kill politicians. What about Mayor Cermak and Franklin Delano Roosevelt and the anarchist who shot him? Do you think there's any possibility that that was retribution for the assassination attempt on Frank Nitti?
Yeah, I do think it, and the details are a little foggy on that, forgive me, but in my book, The Outfit, I talk about the fact that it might not have been what we've been told it was in terms of his motive. And it was either the Nitti thing, I can't recall the details, but I do have it in the book, but it's been, like I say, 25 years since I talked about that part of it. That part of Chicago mob history, I did very little original research. That was a prologue to The Outfit, and The Outfit is where I got serious. All that stuff that happened before they took charge was potted from other sources and other books. But I believe there was more to it, and you can refresh that when you look at the book, the different possibilities.
Another one that everybody wants to talk about is Marilyn Monroe. How did the outfit intersect with her, if at all?
Well, given their hold over Hollywood, they intersected with all the big stars. And Sam Giancana's kids will tell you that Sam knew Marilyn. He was with her at the Cal Neva a month before she died. And who was there? It was Sinatra, Roselli, Giancana, and Marilyn at the Cal Neva. And there was some talk that he played a role in her career, with contracts and stuff. So, you can pretty much guess that any major star in those days had to have some linkage, directly or indirectly, with these guys, because they controlled all the best clubs, all the movie studios.
How long do you have to work around here before you stop calling me Mr. Haskins?
I always treat men with respect. Then they treat me with respect, Mr. Haskins.
Is that a proven theory or something you're just trying out?
You really didn't work. Dean Martin said it. He said, Frank and I didn't necessarily love the mob guys, but we had to work. They owned all the good clubs. They had the jukeboxes. They had the movies. What were we supposed to do? Pretend we never met them? And so, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't think they had anything to do with her killing, death, but they certainly knew her. In fact, Jack Clark, who was a great source of mine, who was a police detective in the intelligence division who followed the outfit, but he also grew up with a lot of the outfit guys. He knew everybody on both sides of it. And he said he saw Marilyn in Chicago a couple of times at some bars with Sam when she would come to town. You know, she was known, but it doesn't bear on anything like her demise, I don't think, anything like that.
What about the time the Rat Pack comes to Wheeling, Illinois, and does a week at this very obscure little club owned by Sam Giancana for practically nothing? How do you get the hottest entertainment act in the world to open up a little gambling den in a tiny city near Chicago?
I think we've answered that question, right? I mean, these guys owed a lot to the mob, and if they said, if Sam said jump, they'd say how high. You know, we already saw that Frank showed up for Curly's daughter's prom, so certainly they're going to come by and sing a couple songs for these guys at the Villa Venice, and yeah, it was just, that was another example. You can crystallize their power in that one example. You know, they got the whole Rat Pack to come to Illinois to sing at a dinky little club just because Sam was opening a new club and needed to have a big opening. And I don't think it lasted very long, the Villa. You may know, a year or two. I can't remember how long he had it. And did it burn down? I think
amazingly it did.
Jack Clark told me that the river that it was on, the Des Plaines River or whatever, he said it was pretty much a garbage dump. And he said that it was the irony of the mob having this fancy club where all this wastewater was going by, and they had the gondolas to imitate, and they were in all this sewage, you know, canoeing. But yeah, there were so many examples of Sam or one of these guys ordering the Hollywood people to do something, and they sort of had to do it.
That's a big week for Chicago mob history, is the Villa Venice.
It sure is. It sure is.
Yeah, you know, Antoinette's still around. I don't know how much she remembers of that stuff. She had a lot to say in the old days about the Villa Venice and that whole situation.
I was able to interview a couple who were at one of the shows, and so their recollection of that night is probably one of the most factual parts in my entire novel.
Oh, really? Thank you for
Yes.
pointing that out. I'll have to look at it because I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, Chicago Heights guy, Frank Laporte had a good friend who owned a macaroni company, and he was actually the one who imported the gondolas for Giancana. So it was a Chicago Heights guy who had gondolas brought in. So Chicago Heights, like I said, like they kind of found their way into every big story in Chicago and West Mississippi.
Oh, that's great.
But that's actually, like I said, that's a really, the way I describe that, that is actually firsthand account of the night.
Oh, that's great. I can't wait to see it.
Jokes told and what they smell and saw is all, that is probably the most factual part of my book.
Oh, my goodness. Wasn't there a story where, not at the Villa, but at the Fontainebleau, where Sam Giancana got mad at Sinatra, who was performing, for maybe making a pass at Phyllis McGuire and tried to set Sinatra on fire on the stage or something. He threw a candle at him. I can't remember the detail who told, I think maybe Antoinette told that story, but just crazy antics, man. You could go on forever. I mean, I could have probably written 4 books on the outfit. That's why I had to write the Korshak book. That was like the bookend of the same characters, you know?
Well, I wish that you would. The outfit is one of my favorite books, and
oh, thank you so much. It means a lot.
well, there's so much in there, and everything you've had it sourced and double sourced and triple sourced, and it's also murky for those of us who study this to have at least a couple of sources that are based in verifiable fact is such a relief.
Well, thanks. You know, and I think if it holds up, it's, you know, I was trained by people who were great investigative reporters, Seymour Hersh, frontline people. And the kind of work we did then to get books done is completely different than the way we do it now. The way people do it now, it's largely Google. And now, but we would travel constantly, you know, to look people in the face because it's different. You get a different story. You get a different vibe when you're interviewing. We interviewed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people face to face. Yeah, and the other thing we did was we were patient. You would file FOIA suits, right? I knew the McClellan committee in the 50s, the early 50s. It was the only congressional committee to ever investigate organized crime. And their boxes were sealed. All their files were sealed. I said, man, if I can get that, because I had heard great stories about how the Chicago mob interfered with that investigation. So I said, where are those files? Oh, they're sealed for 50 years. And it's just from 1953 or whatever and I was writing the outfit in the late 90s. And so the 50-year thing hadn't come up yet. And I couldn't get him. I said, well, I figured, how can I do it? Somebody said, one of my friends said, well, the Congress oversees everything at the Library of Congress. It's under seal. They can make exceptions. So I had to find out what congressional committee oversaw the old Kefauver boxes. It was John McCain's committee. I wrote a letter. I said, you know, the 50-year thing is up in a couple of years, but I'm writing the book now. Is there any chance? And they said, they're yours. So I got all the Kefauver boxes, 50 some boxes. They opened them up in front of me, dusty old boxes. My point is that became source for a lot of stuff that nobody else had on organized crime. I did the same thing with Sidney Korshak. I did FOIAs, and it took me years to get the file on him, the real file, not the one that's on the internet. The real one was 7,000 pages. And I couldn't have written the book without it. But I could write a whole news article on how I got those files, how hard it was. And I'm just saying that, you know, if these books hold up, it's because, you know, I was taught to do it the old-fashioned way, just to hang in there and do the hard work and not just sit at my desk, which I'm afraid is where it's going, you know, with this kind of stuff. But there are a lot of things out there that have to be done the hard way. A lot of information. You know, you gotta. When I went to the Fontainebleau in Miami, I mean, on your own expense, you got in the Fontainebleau for a week, and because you want to meet all the employees, the people who were there in the 60s, and they told me all the stories about what was really going down. None of it's on the internet. You know, in my outfit book, I don't think there's any sources in that for this book that were Googled. In my Korshak book, I severely footnoted it with thousands of footnotes. There might be 5 that are off the internet, you know, and the theory that everything is online is wrong. That's, I guess, what I'm saying.
Well, it really shows in your books, and they've been a wonderful source of inspiration for me. Actually, I have 2 copies of the outfit. One I keep clean, and the other is highlighted and tabbed, and I've got more color stickies on that thing than you've.
You make my day. I'm glad that somebody out there, you know, I had a guy call me about a month ago. We've become friends. He ran Universal Pictures for about 15 years. He ran it. And he was with Lou Wasserman every day. He was the head of development. And he He was with Lou. He's had poker games with Sidney Korshak every Friday night and Mo Dalitz and Lou every Friday. He knew it. He greenlighted a couple hundred of our favorite movies, from E.T., you name it. He calls me up, and he's a fan, and he said, Gus, I have to tell you this. Your Super Mob book is the most accurate book of Hollywood ever written. He said, you got it right. And I was in the middle of it. He could have been an apologist and said, I got it all wrong. He said, you were 100% right. And it's even worse than you know.
Well, and you did get it right.
For people like that, it makes you think, okay, I didn't make a lot of money on them, but, it was worth it just to know that people appreciate it. People who know the stories,
Well, I'm very appreciative of all your hard work, especially with the Kennedy and Castro thing. I found myself completely enthralled with it. And I think anyone who takes the time, to read your books on it and to understand your level of research, I think you wrap up everything. And to me, I feel like you solved all the questions. And I think it's, a lot of Americans who don't know that you wrote that book, who want to know about the Kennedys. There's no questions. They're all been answered by you, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I did it, all these things. I never entered into that world to get rich. I was pursuing my own questions, and I needed publishers to pay my research bills, basically, right? I wanted to find out who killed Kennedy. I wanted to find out about the Chicago mob. These were my things. And if I would have been into making money, I'd have gotten into a whole other profession. This was just my obsessions. And I was fortunate enough to be able to finagle people into paying my bills, but yeah, I did it for me and for people like you who really wanted to know. I had no bias. I didn't care who did it. I didn't care if it was the mob or the CIA. I had an open mind, and I followed all the trails, and where it led is the books that I put out.
Well, you definitely set me straight, so I appreciate it.
Thank you, man. One at a time.
And thank you, author Guss Russo. We've got so many more questions, but we're out of time for today. We appreciate so much you being with us. You are an incredible wealth of information, and we hope we can talk to you again sometime really soon.
That would be wonderful. Thank you, guys. You have a great operation. Good luck with everything, and hopefully we can stay in good touch, too.
All the best to you.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
That concludes season 1 of Made Men. Hope you all enjoyed this season. I want to give special thanks to Paul, Ray, and the crew. Also, check out our sponsor Chuck Zito on Instagram and his Rides Whiskey. Stay tuned for more and follow us on 6 Degrees Media on the Roku and all of our social media.